What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got David from Covet. Thank you for your time today, man. Great to talk to you again.
Hell yeah, Alex. Thanks for having me again, man. It's exciting.
Yeah, it was a good time last year at Elsewhere in Brooklyn. It was, sizzling hot out, but you guys put on an amazing show. The skyline was behind you guys during a full moon. That was definitely a memorable show.
Objectively, I think that was one of the coolest shows we've ever played.
That's awesome. And it sold out, too, which was even better.
Yeah, it was wild. I just remember, oh man, so many elements of that show were really special. Like you said, the skyline in the background. There were so many friends and family there. The loadout was like crazy.
But that's a New York show. That's to be expected.
Yeah, it was really fun. I think somebody was like using the elevator to bring all the stuff up and down, but to like load. I think there was another building that was getting like a grocery load for their kitchen area.
Yep.
Yeah, it was just funny.
Sounds about right. Sounds about right. Not to mention that venue is like 5 venues in one, so.
Yeah, I remember it's like 3 stories and stuff. It's got like a whole bunch of stuff going on.
Definitely. It was a memorable one though, for sure. But the newest album is Technicolor, which is scheduled to come out later this year. Is this just a direct continuation from what you guys were doing on Efflorescence, or is this like a new beginning for Covet in a way?
Well, I think if you compare Efflorescence to our first EP, Currents, I think there's like a noticeable change, not only just like in the production, but also the songwriting and the general style. I feel like Technicolor is more of an extension of Efflorescence than it is of Currents, in that like it has more of those kind of wider soundscapes and a little bit more diversity in the sound. I think it is. There's a lot of elements to this record that are very new for us. For one, Yvette is singing with lyrics on a couple of the songs, so that's brand new territory for us. Additionally, it's just there's a few songs that are wildly different from anything we've ever done. Songs like Pirouette and Odessa, and so I think it's like it touches on elements of our music in the past, but I definitely think it is like a new thing for us. Mm-hmm. For sure.
Could the first single, Parachute, almost serve as like a clear representation of this album, or is like that just scratching the surface for Technicolor?
I would say, yeah, that song is scratching the surface. There's a surprising amount of diversity in this album. Like, I think once we got it all complete, once we got some of the final mixes back, and we were listening to it in its entirety and getting like a track order all correct, we're like, wow. Because Parachute, it's one of 2 songs with the vocals. It's also kind of got like a poppier, lighter sound. Whereas I would say that like there's a general, I don't know. There's definitely some elements to this record that like have some more heaviness to it than I think what Parachute represents. Although, like, the end of Parachute has kind of like a little bit of a heavy outro, or a heavy section towards, like, 4 minutes and beyond. But, yeah, I think scratching the surface is an accurate way to describe it.
Mm-hmm. Well, was it kind of like a preconceived idea to, like, let's incorporate vocals and let's create a record that's more experimental, or did it kind of just happen that way?
Yeah, it just kind of happened that way. That's the fun part about being in Covet, is it feels like there's very rarely like explicitly deliberate things like that, especially when it comes to the writing process. It's really just, it's very organic, and it's very, I think all of us have the mentality, it's whatever's best for the song ultimately is what ends up making it on.
Mm-hmm. And being like a bass player, like, do you have more of an emphasis on rhythm before Yvette brings in her guitar melody, or do you have like a whole bass pattern written down and maybe the band could write according over that?
Yeah, well, usually the way the songwriting works, minus I think 2 songs in our collection, is Yvette has essentially the whole guitar part written out. There's a few exceptions to that, like the very end of Shibia, the very end of Parachute. She had like parts written, but then when we brought them into a room as a band, they kind of got rearranged and switched around and extended. Usually, there's a song called "Gleam" on our last recording that was the entire bass part was written before, and then they wrote guitar and drums to it. But typically, yeah, she comes with a full guitar part, and we write bass and drums to that. So that was pretty much similar for this recording. When it comes to writing vocals, I feel like playing bass to that is a very different. It's a very different procedure, because I feel like Covet is a very unique bass playing opportunity in that I am only competing against one other melodic instrument. I'm not competing against another voice. In my other band, Vesper Sales, there's a voice and two guitars, so there's a lot of like harmonic and melodic content going in the upper registers that I can't be picking a lot of melodic notes out as much as I can in, say, a Covet song, because a Covet song, there's a lot more potential for where I can move around and where I can go with certain pitches that won't rub against other things. So that was a fun element of this record, was like writing two vocals, but in a Covet context was like a very it was a first time experience, and I'm just glad I have experience doing that in the past.
Yeah, that kind of led me perfectly into the next question, because you almost have to like adjust your playing style in Covet now, being that there are vocals incorporated. Does it almost make it like a completely different strategy in executing the song, or does that not really make much of a difference?
It definitely affects the way that I approach the song, for sure, because like I said, there's certain intervals when you play them on a bass, they can sound really jarring if there's a whole bunch of stuff on top of it. Like additional guitars, like vocals. So I feel like there's some instances where, like essentially just when there's vocals, it's like kind of step back a bit and then just really work on just reinforcing the root of the harmony for the most part, and just kind of playing around with fifths and octaves and not really stepping too much outside with color, because you don't want to get in the way of what's happening vocally and distract and potentially even make it awkward sounding.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely a different approach for those moments in those songs.
Being that lyrics were incorporated, like, did maybe a subject matter or a concept help influence the making of Technicolor as well? Did, like, maybe the lyrics influence, like, the sound in a way?
I would think, just off the top of my head, and just kind of knowing the writing process, I don't think that was the case. I think that the lyrics are more just kind of an element. I think they definitely tie and relate to the individual song and like the sound of the song, and that's ultimately what kind of dictated what the lyrical content became, was what Yvette felt like when she was listening to the music. But I don't know if the lyrics really I don't think the lyrics really affected any of the other music in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always thought that even though you guys were predominantly an instrumental band, I thought with the melody that you conveyed in your music, you were just as good as expressing an emotion or an imagery or a narrative as if there were lyrics all the time. So,
it's quite the compliment. Thank you.
Anytime. One thing I was actually really curious about is, and I know that I'm asking this probably way too early, but being that you incorporated so many new elements for Technicolor, do you think that this opened more doors for Covet in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of those things where it's kind of like yes and no, because I feel like now that the fact that we've done it sets a precedent, so it won't be as jarring for people if there are, say, more vocals or other shorter songs, other longer songs, kind of in the future. I don't think it'll be that. Sorry, there's like a bird that just flew up. Flew up and almost attacked my toes. But yeah, I think that it does set a precedent, like I said, for vocals and for song lengths and structures and things like that. But also the fun part, and like I kind of touched on this earlier, is that like this band kind of, it will be whatever we want it when we want it to be. So it's kind of, who knows what the future holds, and it's possible that there will be vocals on the next record. It's possible that there won't be vocals on the next record. I think it's just kind of however the riffs come out and however the music kind of speaks to us.
Yeah. Well, I've always considered your music to be so experimental anyway that trying new things clearly was never an issue for Covet, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's safe to say.
But like, do these ideas like just come out of nowhere sometimes, or do you guys kind of like look for inspiration? Is there kind of like a strategic element into incorporating new sounds into your style?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I don't know if there's ever like an explicit goal before the song is written to achieve a specific thing. I think it really is kind of like Yvette just has these amazing epiphanies when it comes to writing these songs, and then when I hear them, it's especially when I think it relates to effects and things like that. I think that's really comes like with the experimenting with writing to the song and riffing with the song. It's like a lot of these things aren't they're not like with Parachute it kind of wasn't like, oh, let's write a song with vocals that has kind of like a little bit of a poppier element to it. It's like, oh no, it's just Yvette has this guitar part, oh, vocal would sound really cool over there, and it's like, oh, where else can we take this track with especially with the drums and bass. That's where I think a lot of the fun kind of crafting the sound of the whole song comes, like after Yvette is done touching it.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that it's that having such an experimental sound has allowed you to tour with like a variety of different bands, right? Like, I mean, playing with a band like Polyphia, which I feel like that, everybody could appreciate that tour. The first time I saw you was with Polyphia and Jason Richardson, but then like, you're playing with bands like Dance Gavin Dance or Periphery. And, I mean, there's definitely a lot of elements in those bands that relate to you guys. But then, you've also played with, like, bands that are a little bit heavier and whatnot. I'd imagine, have you noticed, like, maybe a different reaction to the music depending on the tours that you've been on?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the biggest difference in reaction is usually instrumental to vocal. Like an audience that's expecting a vocal, for example, that would be the DGD, the Dance Gavin Dance case. When we were doing that tour, there was a lot of people who enjoyed it just because I think there's a lot of crossover with Dance Gavin Dance has some pretty killer instrumentals to it, so I think people can appreciate the instrumental element of our music. I think that when it came to performing those songs, initially we were the opening band for the first half of that tour, and then Periphery only played the first half of that tour, and then they left in Columbus, Ohio, I think it was. And there was another band called Thousand Below that joined, and they ended up taking the first slot, and they were a vocal band.
Great guys.
Yeah, no, they're sick, and they were really fun to tour with too. We shared a lot of green rooms with those guys. It was really interesting. I noticed that there was definitely a noticeable audience reaction just in that back half of that tour, because I think when Periphery was on the tour and we were the first of 5, I think starting the show with an instrumental band, I think it kind of took people by surprise, but they weren't confused. They didn't have as much of a confused look. Whereas when we would follow up Thousand Below, they hear a band with vocals, and then there's an instrumental band following immediately after that. So there'd be some confused. I feel like there's generally more confused looks, but those were really big shows. So I feel like you're kind of expecting that when you have that many people you're playing in front of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that the elements of Yvette's guitar work and the general sometimes the heavier elements of the sound and sometimes the calmer elements of the sound really allows us to kind of play with lots of different people. And generally the instrumental thing too, I feel like bands like Periphery and DGD with kind of that scream or growl vocal.
Well,
I kind of in there too.
Well, I feel like instrumental music is almost kind of like butter on a tour. It goes with anything at this point. Animals as Leaders played on Summer Slaughter one time with Cannibal Corpse. So I mean So I almost feel like instrumental music is always like very easy for people to digest and easy to
Good
grasp
point.
onto.
I think so. That's cool that you saw us with Flippy and Jason Richardson. It's at that Webster Hall show in the middle.
Yep.
Oh, that was one of the most fun shows ever.
Yeah, that was insane. I've never seen. I remember there was such a violent mosh pit during Polyphia's set.
Yeah, people go ham during those Polyphia sets. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, Chan has a lot of fun mosh pits as well.
Yeah, I think when we toured with Chon, and right after that, like the couple months after that, when we played in Baltimore, they got like 96 crowd surfers or something like that.
That
It's
doesn't.
wild.
That's insane. Like, I mean, I've seen Chan so many times now. They're in New York like every North American tour, and every time I see them, it's always like just the ultimate party.
Complete madness. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great too because they're so like reserved on stage too.
Yeah.
Speaks to the power of music, you know.
Yeah, and being a diehard Nintendo fan, you gotta. Yeah, I wish you would show a little more love towards Zelda instead of Super Mario, but
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Someday I'll file a complaint.
You're a Zelda fan too?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Wind Waker.
That's awesome. I've been playing Breath of the Wild under quarantine like crazy.
Ooh, I haven't gotten around to that one yet, but I had a friend who just finished it. And they said they're sad now that they're done. They were so captured by it.
You're never done with that game. There's so much to do. It's impossible to finish the entire thing.
I think he was putting in some serious quarantine hours.
Well, there you go. Hey, you can do anything under quarantine.
Yep.
And the final question I wanted to ask you is kind of pertaining to the live presence as well. Is there maybe a similar creative energy that you channel into your live presence as you do when you're songwriting, or is playing live and writing music a completely separate art?
I think that's when I feel like when I'm enjoying and having the best ideas writing is when I'm getting lost in the music. And I feel like it's the same thing when I'm performing live. I feel like that sense of kind of like stepping outside of yourself is usually when there's good things happening. So I feel like trying to channel when I am in the writing process, when I stop being overly analytical and I just kind of let the music flow from my head, and from what I hear in my head, I feel like that's when I get the best result. And I think that when playing live, when you kind of, it's like that I don't know, there's an energy to it, and I feel like live musicians and performers probably attest to that too. It's like there's just like I don't know, it's like something's coming through you almost, and I feel like that there's an energy that I do try to capture when I am writing. It's like, like you feel the excitement coming through you, but it's maybe not as that's a very interesting question. Sorry, I'm really racking my brain. I'm trying to articulate it too. I feel like it's an interesting sensation to articulate. It's like when I'm writing, if I'm playing it and I feel like, oh, this just feels really natural. I feel like those are the times when I'm playing live and it just feels effortless. It kind of like translates from the writing process to the stage in a way.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting question, Alice.
I try my best.
Well, I think.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Just obviously, because of the virus that shall not be named, I know that touring right now is not happening, but I'd imagine once all this is over, you'll be bringing the new album out on the road, and we'll be seeing quite a lot of you guys, right?
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the play. I hope everyone can stay safe and stay healthy, and I can't wait to share this music with people, especially in a live format. It's going to be fun. I'm freaking stoked.
Yeah, it's going to be absolutely awesome. But David, great to talk to you again, and hope to see you in New York very soon. Everybody, we are here with David of Covet. Be sure to pick up Technicolor when it comes out. This is Alex from Heaven, New York, and we will see you next time.